All right, back on page 183. It was really too hot for all this running, not to mention nearly impossible in Mary Jane's, which had slippery soles and narrow straps that cut into your ankle. At least the hotels were only 2 blocks apart. Violet walked fast, back to the ladies' entrance of the Hermitage and into the elevator, where she told the white-uniformed boy, "Top floor, please." It took them a long time to get there, and as they rode up, Violet's panic lessened. Whoever they were talking about kidnapping, and it was clearly one of the soft legislatures, didn't sound like a real solid plan. It was just Mr. Garlick talking, and he might be the sort of man who just liked to say things to shock people. Still, whoever they'd been talking about needed to know he might be in danger. The elevator stopped for a long time on the 8th floor, where the Anti's hospitality suite had already been fully restocked. There was loud singing going on of several anti-suffrage songs at once. None of the anti-songs were anywhere near as stirring as the suff songs, Violet thought, even when the singers weren't drunk. The top floor of the Hermitage was a big ballroom with a wide wooden dance floor and an orchestra. It was full of men and women, mostly women, wearing evening dress and red or yellow roses. Violet was momentarily grateful to Miss Esquadrille for dressing her in clothes that wouldn't get her thrown out of the ballroom. She looked around for her sister. There she was, wearing a long white gown and a yellow rose, and dancing with a young man with slicked back blonde hair who was wearing a red rose. "Miss Mayhew certainly kept Harry T. Byrne busy," said a lady standing near Violet. "If we have the woman power, we need to keep the Antis away from him. He just might be persuadable." Persuadable or not, Mr. Byrne seemed to be having a good time. Clearly Chloe was doing her work well, Violet thought. In fact, all the men, whether they wore red or yellow roses, seemed to be enjoying the extra attention they were getting. "I don't know, Mrs. Dudley," said another woman, whom Violet recognized as Miss Pulitzer. "He said something to me about 'my vote will never hurt you,' but he was batting his eyes when he said it. I think he's just flirting with us." "He can flirt all he wants as long as he votes aye," said Mrs. Dudley. "Let's go get some punch." Violet looked up to see Mr. Martin enter the ballroom. He had somehow gotten hold of a necktie and a celluloid collar, which he had buttoned over his Bolshevik soft collar. But other than that, he hadn't made concessions to the sort of clothing you were supposed to wear in a ballroom. What was the matter with the fella? Violet thought, irritated. Why did he have to keep showing his wanted face in public? He marched over to where Chloe was dancing with Mr. Byrne. He tapped Mr. Byrne on the shoulder. "May I cut in?" Violet heard him say. Violet knew from dancing school that there was only one way a gentleman could react to such a challenge, and that was to leave as gracefully as possible. Chloe and Mr. Martin started waltzing as Mr. Byrne backed away, looking disgruntled. He headed for the sidelines, and Violet saw an Anti eyeing him eagerly. Miss Pulitzer and Mrs. Dudley were nowhere to be seen. Violet quickly stepped into his path. "Mr. Byrne, please, may I have the honor of this dance?" She held out her hand, wondering if she should bow. The boys had been taught to do this in dancing school, but girls, of course, didn't ask people to dance. They waited to be asked. But Chloe wouldn't want Mr. Byrne to fall into the hands of an Anti. Mr. Byrne looked amused. "Why not?" he said, which was not what the girls in dancing school were taught to say. He took her outstretched hand, and Violet stepped gracefully into the dance with him. One good thing about dancing school was that even though there were about 100 better ways to spend an afternoon, it did teach you to dance. Violet had no trouble following Mr. Byrne's steps and felt only a little self-conscious waltzing across the floor among all these adults. "I'm Violet, Miss Mayhew's sister," Violet said, introducing herself belatedly. "And yet you seem to be on the other side," said Mr. Byrne cheerfully. "Oh, well, yes." Violet had forgotten about the stupid red rose she was wearing. "Your sister seems to have run into an old friend," said Mr. Byrne with a sour smile. Violet looked over at Chloe. She and Mr. Martin were standing with one arm around each other and the other hand clasped in a waltz position, but they were no longer dancing. They were just standing there, staring at each other. No, not staring, Violet thought, gazing. Nothing in Violet's dancing school experience had suggested this was at all acceptable ballroom behavior. But Chloe and Mr. Martin looked as if they had forgotten that there was anyone else in the room. "It's just someone she knew from New York," Violet said, then instantly bit her tongue. Mr. Martin was a fugitive, and giving any information about him was dangerous, even just the information that he lived in New York. "Knew pretty well, I'd say," said Mr. Byrne, and Violet was relieved that he sounded amused now instead of sour. Mr. Byrne seemed like a nice man, really, Violet thought, except for being an anti. The waltz was coming to an end, and Violet could sense that Mr. Byrne was already looking around for an older lady than Violet to dance with. And if there was one thing there was no shortage of in this ballroom, it was ladies. Violet looked around desperately. The sidelines seemed to bristle with red roses. Sorry, trucks are coming by, 1 second. As I was saying, the sidelines seemed to bristle with red roses. Ah, there was a yellow rose, Miss Pulitzer, and she was nearly as pretty as Chloe, Violet thought. Behind Mr. Byrne's back, she gestured desperately to Miss Pulitzer, who fortunately came over to rescue Mr. Byrne just as the dance ended. Miss Pulitzer was a member of the National Women's Party, like Chloe and Alice Paul, and she knew about Violet being a spy. "May I have the honor of this dance, Mr. Byrne?" Violet heard Miss Pulitzer say. "Delighted, I'm sure, Miss Pulitzer," said Mr. Byrne, beaming. There's no question that Mr. Byrne was enjoying the Susan B. Anthony amendment very much. Violet looked around for Chloe and Mr. Martin, but couldn't see them anywhere. Well, that wouldn't do. She needed to tell Chloe about Mr. Garlick's kidnapping plan right away. She wondered if there was anybody else she could tell. The problem was that except for Miss Pulitzer, everyone else she thought she was an anti. Mrs. Ann Dallas Dudley, the lady who'd been talking to Miss Pulitzer, was an important Nashville suff, but if Violet spoke to her, Mrs. Dudley would assume Violet was just part of an anti-trap. She walked over to the elevator and pushed the button. Then she lost patience and headed down the stairs. I'm going to stop there. I'm on the middle of page 1.